Can you hear me?
Yes. Swing. All right. And I made some changes to the PowerPoint. So it's not going to be the same as yours. So let's try to see if I can get it to share screen now.
Okay.
Or I do share screen, correct? It says host disable participant screen sharing.
Okay, let me go in here. Okay, you should be good.
Yes. Can you see it?
I can.
My goodness, it's just a miracle. So now I want to do here. Yeah, slideshow. Okay.
Look at that.
And now we wait.
All right. Yeah. So I've got, okay. So before you start, I have an introduction that I will read, and that will kind of lead you into your thing. Okay. And then you'll do your presentation, and maybe like a keyword at the end. I don't know what you want it to be, like, thank you for coming or whatever, because then I have a whole outro that I'm going to do, but I don't want to start it until I know for sure you're finished.
Okay. And because there's so many slides, I was hoping to have, people participate through chat.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Because I'm going to have to close my windows all the way.
I can, but I have a little bit of background. I'm hoping somebody doesn't decide to cut their grass while we're doing this.
I don't have air in my office, so I just closed the windows. So if you start seeing me sweating, it's not because of anxiety per se.
Oh, I was going to say, I can't say the same. Mine will be anxiety.
If they trip me up with some questions, then I might be sweating, but yeah. So we'll
No, there's only a couple of people registered, literally, like Ken, you, myself, and I believe 4 others.
Okay. Oh, good.
So,
Maybe
yeah.
for more dialogue.
What was that?
That might allow for more dialogue. Okay.
So yeah, and then like I'll open it up with that intro, to give them the opportunity if they want to respond in the chat to things. And what I'll do is, if they are putting questions in the chat, I'm trying to think of like some cue ways that I can let you know, like, hey, we've got a question. So maybe in between a slide, if one pops up, I'll just speak on it. That way you can go ahead and answer it. Or would you rather me wait until the end?
Oh, we'll just have a dialogue as we go. Well, I will just preface that it's probably going to take the full hour and a half, but I would like dialogue. I think it makes for a more interesting presentation. And if we have to move through some of the more tedious things, that I'd be willing to share this PowerPoint for people.
Okay, beautiful. So if somebody does ask the question, if the PowerPoint will be shared with them, is it okay for me to just go ahead and say yes?
Okay. We just need their email.
Yep, yep. We've got everybody's information and stuff like that. So as long as you're okay with that, then we can go ahead and just answer that question.
Super. And so I found some random spelling errors and things. So the one that I have showing right now will be, I'll save, and I'll just email it to you when the presentation's done.
Beautiful. Okay.
All right, I'll be right back.
Yep, that works. So we've got people joining already. So there's about 5, I think.
Okay.
And then once noon hits, I think I'll let all of them in. And then I'll read the intro and then the floor will be yours.
Hi.
Sound good? I'm gonna go get something to drink really quick. I'll be right back.
Hey, I want to say thank you to you too for all of your patience yesterday, and you just called as a cucumber. We'll figure it out. You were solution focused, and I'm very grateful for you.
Oh, well, I appreciate you for that because there's mild panic and anxiety behind all of that. So if I came off that way, that's great. Thank you for the what's the word I'm looking for? Positive reinforcement for things that I am totally insecure about.
You did great. Okay.
Thank you for working with me because this is all so new.
Okay. Well, it won't be for long.
Fair enough. And then I'm just gonna check something really quick because when you go on, I want you to just be the person on screen. I think. So, okay, so we'll pop up like this first. And then when you get ready to speak, can you see the view?
Yeah, I can see you and me.
Okay, and then, all right, and then now what do you see?
Me and you.
You do? Okay, because I only see you, so that's okay. Because that just means this is going to be what's actually recording, because I want the focus to be on you during the presentation. I don't want everybody to be, like if somebody goes to watch it on YouTube, I don't want them to see all the participants. I just want you to be there. Does that make sense? All eyes on you.
I don't like that per se, but that's okay. It's going on YouTube.
Oh, yeah,
Didn't
there, you were not aware of that.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay, so
That's okay. Whatever.
I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of that, because that somebody might not be okay with doing a presentation that's going to be uploaded on, you know, a bigger social media platform.
Yeah, because I don't profess to be an expert in trauma.
I mean, I hear you. I'm in the process of doing an LGBTQIA plus one for this series, and I'm just kind of navigating off of personal experience and a little bit of, you know, stats that I pull more than anything.
Oh.
And I'm second guessing myself now. Like, we're posting this on YouTube for like people. That's scary, but I thought that that was laid out. So I'm going to send an email out. You'll be included just because you've been a presenter, letting people know the specifics, like, hey, listen, this is, because I don't think that that's fair for somebody to sign up to something without being completely aware of what's going on. And I thought everybody was, so my apologies for that.
You know, it's funny. I've been doing this for 30 years, just as a psychologist, but I got asked last year for someone that had a psychological evaluation done here, and I got subpoenaed. And I was asked, do you feel that you're an expert in your field? And I'm like, I don't think, I don't know.
Define expert.
Like I know what I'm doing, but you know, I just think we're always growing. So I don't ever feel like I'm done. I'm like, whoop, here's my title. I'm an expert now. You know?
Fair enough. I mean, at least you've got, it sounds like an open mindset though, like room for growth always, if that's fair to say.
Very fair to say.
So professional opinion, the background for myself, is that inappropriate or what do you think?
Very nice.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because I got like a couch cushion right here.
Yeah, it looks nice. Yesterday you were on the couch with I think a blankie behind you.
Yep, nope, that was on a personal level. Today's on a professional level. You had me raw form yesterday. I was literally camped out on the couch for the day. So
you have a nice little person with you.
yeah, yep. Had my kid with me and whatever was behind me. I think a stuffed animal in a blanket or something. I don't know.
At times, that's what you should do on a day off.
Different house too, so things change. So we've got one in so far. So yeah, we're just gonna kind of, I had someone reach out to me. I just sent the link to. So hopefully they'll jump on.
Jacqueline Blair.
I know I had to resend links out. So I'm hoping, do you have personal contact with her, right? Like text?
In her office, but she's doing another training at 1, so I don't think she's coming to this.
Okay. All right, so I'm gonna do something really quick and I'd like you to tell me is if you're sharing screen with me, so I'm kind of curious. Can you see any part of my computer?
No.
Perfect. Because I've got your outro pulled up in the back, or your intro pulled up in the background. And like I said, Ken kind of ran this whole show the very first time, so we're rocking and rolling. I think we're all right.
You guys ready for your barbecue?
Getting there. We got the truck, and actually I got a call and find out about some parking space. So thank you for bringing that up. But yeah,
Closed already?
pardon me?
Aren't your streets closed down for construction?
Yes, it's going to make it a little more difficult for, I think, people to park and stuff like that. So we asked one of the neighboring agencies to see if we could utilize their parking lot. And I actually need to reach back out to that and find out if that's okay. So hopefully we'll have some people. You coming down?
I am. I'm going to come at the beginning because my son's graduation party is on Saturday, and I've still got shopping to do, last minute shopping on Friday night.
Oh, cool.
Or the earlier part of the barbecue.
Good. Well, that'll be nice. Are you going Friday to outpatient?
Oh,
In
yeah.
Flint?
I would have driven to Port Huron this Friday. This Friday is outpatient. Yours is in later July, right?
Correct.
Okay. Oh, that makes my life a lot easier as far as what happens on Saturday. So great. Yes, I will be at outpatient too.
I'll see you then. I'm gonna come down from Port Huron and come to the one Friday.
Thanks.
Yeah, and then ours here in Port Huron is July 7th.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure that there should be a flyer out. I think Ken sent it universally to everybody in the agency.
Yeah, he did.
Okay, just making sure that went. So I'm gonna wait until right at noon.
Okay.
And then, like I said, I'll let people in. I will give, maybe if you're okay with it, give just a grace period. Just, we're gonna wait for a few minutes to see if anybody else joins. And if not, then I'm gonna do the intro and then I will tell you. So the last sentence that I'm gonna say is the conclusion of today's presentation. We will share a link to an evaluation survey. Completing this will provide you with your certificate of attendance. And then that will be when you're just going to kind of take the floor.
Okay.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay. And then can you do me a favor? When we have no more questions, when you're done speaking and all of that, and you're okay, can you just say maybe like, thank you, or is that okay?
I'll just say, I'll be wrapping up. And so in conclusion, I want to thank everybody for participating today. It was a pleasure. And I wish you all a lovely summer or something like that.
All right, great. And then I'll do the outro. And then that'll be it.
Good.
Cool. All right. I'm gonna.
You're gonna what?
Nope, I'll wait. I'll wait till you come back.
Wham!
No, I want you to get fully ready.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You okay with me letting people in? All right, I'm gonna start it. We've got 2 people.
Oh boy.
I think I'm not going to admit them yet. I think like as we do this and work the kinks out and stuff like that, being able to get it promoted on a bigger level somehow. It might take a little bit to kind of get up and going, but for now, at least we have people, wanting to join. So, all right, I'm going to admit.
Okay.
All right, right now. Can everybody hear me okay?
Say that. Say it's me. Remember, you've got your speaker on.
I know I gotta turn it off. How do I do that now, Nancy? I'm just so.
Everybody, can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Thumbs up, super great. I'm just gonna wait for just another minute or two, see if anybody wants to join, and then we'll get started, okay? Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started, guys. So, good afternoon. Hello and welcome to the Port Huron Odyssey House Stigma Prevention Project Educational Series. I am Alesha Fay. Today's speaker is Kristine Dunn. Kristine has had the pleasure of working as a clinical behavioral psychologist for 31 years. Kristine is a certified advanced alcohol and drug counselor, a certified clinical supervisor, and the clinical director at Flint Odyssey House Residential Substance Use Disorder Treatment Program. She has also worked in community mental health and the public school systems. She enjoys educating individuals on how to improve their quality of life by identifying symptomology and challenges that interfere with one's well-being. Kristine welcomes the opportunity to help individuals become more balanced with increased satisfaction and living life well. We ask that you please remain muted for the presentation. You can have your camera on or off, whichever is your preference. This presentation will be recorded and posted on the Flint Odyssey House YouTube channel. Only the live version today will be eligible for McBath educational credit. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat or save them until the end when we will have time for a question and answer. At the conclusion of today's presentation, we will share a link to an evaluation survey. Completing this will provide you with your certificate of attendance. The PowerPoint is also going to be available, and I will make that available to everyone as well. All right, thank you. Go ahead, Kristine.
Thank you, Alesha. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this training on understanding the impact of trauma and substance use disorders. We have a lot of slides to go through, but I would like to have an open dialogue with you as well. You don't wait till the end of the presentation for me. Let's just have those questions pop up when you have them, and we'll try to answer them together. I think presentations can be quite boring if I'm the only one participating. So I really welcome you to raise your hands if you have comments, if you have examples that you want to share, please do so. I do anticipate that this is going to take a full 90 minutes. So I will try to speak quickly. I sometimes go like Jimmy John's fast. So I will slow down if I need to, but please feel free to interrupt me. There's no worries with that. So the materials that I adapted from this was for the CE4 less and from chapter 3 of the TIP 57. So when we start, just by in the chat, can you let me know, like, what is your experience with trauma and or substance use? Do you not have any experience with working with people with trauma or people that have substance use disorders? Great. Okay, good. We will be talking about a variety of things, including adverse childhood experiences, but we are going to look at what trauma is. We're going to look at the reactions that are common in trauma that include cognitive reactions, physical reactions, behavioral reactions, emotional reactions.
We currently do not.
And how that plays in people's experiences with substance use.
Every day I can remember to the pathway shelter.
Christina, can you mute, please?
And we are going to look at the connection between substance use disorders and cyclical trauma, which can be bidirectional. We're going to talk about trauma-informed care, how we approach people that have experienced trauma and substance use treatment. And then we're going to conclude with an overview of what resilience is. So let's begin. So what is trauma? Trauma is a distressing or disturbing experience. When it becomes chronic or untreated, it becomes toxic stress. And it has a serious impact on the individual health, social and cultural structure, and economic stability. When I talk about toxic stress, that is something that is acute, it can be cumulative, and it can be chronic, and it impacts people's well-being mentally, physically, behaviorally, and it can really impact not only adults, but children as well. Children that have observed domestic violence in their home, or if they have been physically abused in their home or sexually abused in their home, can develop toxic stress, which can be detrimental to the health of any human being. We know trauma has no boundaries, affects children and adults from all socioeconomic backgrounds. It's one of the common denominators for individuals receiving services from social service organizations, and its impact is clearly seen in our nation right now. We are enduring so much violence and trauma in school systems, at concerts, in parades, and it's just, it's awful, and it seems to be escalating. And I have a lot of concern for people. You know, we came out of COVID, and I think when people were homebound, we know that substance use increased exponentially. And then when COVID ended, we were able to come out, all of this violence and trauma has been endured. And so we will see how those connect with one another in regard to substance use. Over time, trauma can alter everything about a person's life and behavior. It shatters trust and safety and leaves people feeling powerless. Trauma leads to profound disconnections from others. When in our residential program, we can have up to 160 people, including men, women, children, dads with children, moms coming in with their children. And trust is an ongoing concern that people say that I don't trust people. It's all been broken. There's no one to trust. I don't know if I can trust myself. And so underlying that is some trauma that that person has experienced for trust to be broken. Survivors of trauma may be on guard and feel overwhelmingly despaired. And when they come into treatment, when you compound that with a substance use disorder, you know, people are very broken and very lost. And it's hard for them to cope with underlying trauma if they're self-medicating with substances. The coping mechanisms can become habits that are hard to quit. And coping, one of the maladaptive things that people cope with is with substance use and other addictive behaviors. They're hard to quit, and trauma can lead to problems at home, at school, and at work. So examples of trauma. Natural causes. We just saw a bunch of tornadoes happen down south. People have lost their homes, their livelihood. Accidents and catastrophes are trauma. Intentional acts of violence is traumatic. Individual, group, and mass traumas are ongoing in this nation right now, and physical trauma has a significant impact on people's substance use as well. Trauma reactions are, and I think this is really important. I hear our counselors at times say, you know, I know what it's like to be in your shoes. We don't know what it's like to be in someone's shoes. All of us could observe a traumatic event and all have a different experience or perception of what we watched. And I think we have to be mindful when we're working with people, whether it's substance use specific or trauma specific, or a combination of the two, having that co-occurring, that we don't own their experience. We don't know what it's like. And so we have to use a lot of open-ended questions about what does the experience feel like for you. It can be more severe if people don't have access to natural supports. If people have trauma reactions in a larger community that they live in, for example, if there's a lot of violence that goes on in their local communities, the reactions to trauma might be very different than somebody that hasn't endured any of that. They had on the news a guy the other day was just speaking about a shooting, and it was just like just a matter of a fact. There was no emotional response behind that, and I don't know if that's a protective factor for him to not have that response, or if he's become so exposed to ongoing repeated trauma that he becomes numb to it. We have to be mindful that reactions range in severity, but all responses, and I can't stress this enough, but all responses, even the most acute, or if you find someone's response peculiar or dramatic, it is their way, and it's a natural response for them to manage the trauma, and it's not a sign of psychopathology. Sometimes you will see people laugh or smirk about things when they hear traumatic stories, and it is their natural response to hide behind that humor based on likely discomfort. Coping styles vary from action-oriented to reflective, to emotionally expressive, to not revealing one's thoughts or feelings readily. So you think about the fight, flight, or freeze. Sometimes, like when you look at 911, we had people running towards the building that was crumbling. You had people standing and looking and watching, and you had people running the exact opposite direction. And I think if you look at those behavioral responses to a traumatic event, we look at the coping styles in a very similar way. Some might be, I'm going to go into active meditation. I'm going to apply grounding techniques. To other people needing more time to reflect on the experience or the exposed trauma. Some people want to purge their trauma on day one in a session. And so we have to pay attention to what form of coping does someone present in that situation. So trauma reactions and responses most of the time are normal. Most of the responses are socially acceptable. It's okay for people to think about the Boston Marathon. And some people were just sitting on the side of the curb, just sitting and being unresponsive. They just were trying to take it in, which is a normal response. Other people were running. Other people were trying to help other people that were harmed. But they're socially acceptable. And usually trauma reactions are psychologically effective. It's a protective factor for that person in that moment to cope in whichever way they seem fit. In my day, when I first was going to school back in the 80s in college, we were taught that you needed to talk about trauma. You needed to talk about your history. You needed to talk about your childhood experiences, because if you don't, you're not going to heal. You're not going to get better. Well, the research just changed on that. The research says that no longer, if survivors of trauma don't want to choose to process their trauma, they're just as psychologically as healthy as others that want to, which I think is really healthy to know, so that we don't have to take someone down a rabbit hole if they don't want to go there. But they can be just fine by not talking about that. I think that's true with grief and loss in trauma. So psychological debriefing approaches emphasize respecting the individual's coping style, not valuing one type over another. And I really spend a lot of time with our staff talking about, if they don't want to talk about it, it is not our job to make them talk about it. you just figure out what else they want to talk about in relation to how do they heal themselves so that they don't have to be engaged in substance use anymore. Okay, severe trauma responses. So today we're going to look at both immediate and delayed trauma responses, and this applies to severe trauma responses. When you have severe trauma responses, it's much like that toxic stress we talked about. You're experiencing continuous distress without periods of relative calm or rest. We're going to talk about severe dissociation symptoms later. And with severe trauma responses, there are intense, intrusive recollections that continue despite a return to safety. I often think of people that have been human trafficked. You know, they have had continuous distress without periods of relative calm or rest. And even when they get to a place of safety, the intense, intrusive recollections are ongoing and detrimental to their well-being. They don't feel safe. They can't eliminate that trauma just because the environment has changed. A delayed response to trauma includes persistent fatigue, sleep disorders, nightmares, fear of recurrence, anxiety focused on flashbacks, avoidance of emotions associated with the trauma, avoidance of sensations associated with the trauma, and avoidance of activities associated with the trauma. We had a female in our program that had sexual trauma about 3 blocks down the street, and she will not go down that street anymore. She will go out of her way to walk several blocks from that street to get to the next location that she needs to go, because that avoidance of that activity is too traumatic for her, so she avoids it. Sensations associated with trauma in our building, you know, we have a lot of noise, and noise can be triggering for people that have had trauma. Sitting too close to people in this building can be a sensation of you're too close to me and I don't know you, and are you going to harm me? I don't trust that, you know, this is safe. And we have to do a lot of positive practice to reinforce the fact that this building is as safe as we can make it. Avoidance of emotions associated with trauma. How do you think people do that? How do people avoid emotions associated with trauma? Well, since we're talking about substance use disorders and the impact of trauma to substance use, a lot of people will avoid emotions associated with their trauma by using substances. And some people just work, you know, they'll throw themselves into their jobs. But so that's just really important to know that there's a lot of reactions to trauma that can be triggering, and then they engage in maladaptive functioning to avoid those feelings. So the immediate trauma reactions include exhaustion, confusion, sadness, anxiety, agitation, anger, disorientation. People sometimes feel like they're losing it, that they're going to go crazy. They don't know what to do with their feelings because they can't process what they're experiencing. You'll see constriction of feelings. Numbness and disassociation are very common, as is confusion. You can see some people that will have absolute physical arousal, physiological arousal. Their heart's beating, they're sweating, they're trembling, where other people might have cognitive arousal. They're hyper alert in what they're trying to process. Some people have a blunted affect. They can't take it in and provide a response yet. Other folks will feel very overwhelmed, and they might be having panic attacks. They might be crying. They might be out of control because they don't know what to do. Immediate responses for observing trauma or experiencing trauma is feeling helplessness or having guilt, feeling unreal. The depersonalization, which we're going to talk about later, is where you feel like you're watching yourself in a situation. We had a female that came in our program. She came in with 3 little boys, and she had a mental illness, and she had significant trauma. And she could be sitting in groups, and she would report that she would depersonalize, and she would feel like she was sitting over the people in the group, and she could see everybody, including herself, but she didn't feel like she was in her own body. And I thought that was a really interesting way for her to explain it. Okay, so those were the immediate. Now, what are the delayed emotional responses that people will experience to trauma? Irritability and hostility, depression, mood swings, instability, anxiety, phobias, generalized anxiety, the fear of trauma recurrence. They will have grief reactions. They have shame. They have feelings of being fragile or vulnerable. And they also have emotional attachment from anything that requires an emotional reaction. A lot of folks coming in, they don't want to disclose their trauma. And it's a delayed emotional response, but we will see people being irritable for no reason, or being hostile, or their moods are all over the place. And they'll say, well, I've got borderline personality disorder, and I've got bipolar, and I have generalized anxiety and depression, and I think I'm manic. And when they get sober and 30 to 45 days in and are able to process the trauma that they've endured from being homeless and living in abandoned houses and being raped or beaten, those responses become more stable as time goes on, as long as you're building in routine and structure for them. Like now they're eating at the same time every day. They're getting amount of sleep. They're taking care of their hygiene. They have a safe place to live. And so it's interesting to watch those immediate emotional responses to trauma, and then the delayed, and then when they start to heal through counseling and getting treatment through groups here. It's pretty profound to watch the growth and the healing. So those were the emotional responses. Now the physical reactions may include nausea, gastrointestinal distress. Sometimes people literally, excuse my language, will shit their pants from being in a traumatic accident. Their system's just letting go because of that fight or flight. Sweating or shivering, feeling faint. A lot of people need to sit down. They need a glass of water. They need to engage in grounding techniques because they're lightheaded. They can't process it. I've seen a lot of folks have muscle tremors or uncontrollable shaking. Blood pressure can increase, your rapid heartbeat increases, rapid respiration, having extreme fatigue or exhaustion. And people that endure trauma during heat often experience this. And then you have to worry for heart attacks and things like that, depending on someone's physical and medical state. And they have greater startle responses. This is not the time to touch somebody if they're having a physical reaction to trauma. You give them more space rather than less. Delayed physical reactions to trauma are sleep disturbances, nightmares, appetite and digestive changes. They have a lower resistance to colds and infections, persistent fatigue, elevated cortisol levels, meaning you're always on go, go. And that eventually depletes your body. When I use the term wound up like an 8-day clock. You know, you're just always going and you can't shut down because you're hyper alert to your situation at all times, even though the trauma is no longer present and you can be in a safe spot. That can be really damaging. That's where that toxic stress comes into play. And then you can have long-term health effects that affect your heart, your liver, your autoimmune system, and pulmonary disease. It's a real thing. Okay, so now we're going on to cognition. What are the immediate things that happen when someone's exposed to trauma? They have difficulty concentrating. They are ruminating. They're playing the event over and over and over. They have a distortion of time and space. It's like if the event was perceived, it was happening in slow motion, even when it could have been like a split second or a few second incident of trauma. Like, for example, if you see someone hit by a car, that's trauma. But when you play that back, that traumatic observation, it is like those video clips, segment by segment by segment. People will often have memory problems. They can't recall important aspects of the trauma and have to ask if it actually occurred. You know, I think when people lose their children, that's something like it's just too overwhelming and too much to process. They will say, like, are they really gone? This can't be happening. Oftentimes there's a strong identification with the victims. If you think of the recent shooting where, what was it, 40 little first graders were murdered by a mass murder. You know, look at that community and the nation as a whole, identifying with who could kill 40 little kids that you've never met. And I think a lot of people that are parents that work with children really identified with the victims and the families. And other immediate cognitive reactions can be having racing thoughts. What's going on? How do I do? What should I be doing? Where should I be going? What's the next step that I need to take? And it can be very confusing. Delayed cognitive reactions to trauma are intrusive memories or flashbacks, reactivation of past traumatic events, a lot of self-blame. What could I have done different if I hadn't put myself in that abandoned house, or if I hadn't been drunk at that party? Maybe this would have never happened. Being preoccupied with the events that took place. Delayed cognitive reactions are now difficulty making decisions. You know, if your home has been invaded, do I go out? Do I leave my home because could it be reinvaded? Do I stay here? What if somebody comes in my house? I mean, they really, that rumination piece is ongoing. The belief that the feelings or memories are dangerous. I can't look at that history of trauma. I can't go there because that's dangerous. It's a dangerous spot for me to go to. Like we already talked about that rabbit hole. If I go down that hole and I revisit that trauma, will I come back out? Will I be okay? Or is this going to literally make me crazy? And I think those are really fair questions for people to ask, and they do ask that. And I think before we address trauma, we have to be sure they have been taught coping skills and that they can cope. Because if you do take them down that rabbit hole without them having the coping skills to mediate that trauma, it can be a very dangerous place to take them. Some delayed cognitive reactions include magical thinking, that certain behaviors, if I do this, then it will protect me against future trauma. Like the lady who's taking three streets down to get to the location she wanted to go. She was only 3 streets away. There could still be someone else dangerous, so that on the 3rd street away. So that magical thinking, if I do that, then I won't have future trauma. Or parents that are overprotective of their child may or may not protect against future trauma. There's no crystal ball for that. Generalization of triggers. So this is about that person who experiences a home invasion during the daytime. They avoid being alone during the day. And that comes with the magical thinking, but the trigger is also the invasion happened during the day. Also, this is something important to note, that people that have delayed cognitive reactions to trauma might start having suicidal ideations. And hopefully they're talking about it, because the ones that don't talk about it are, to me, the scarier of the two. All right, we're going to go to behavioral reactions to trauma. Startled reactions, restlessness, sleep disturbances, appetite disturbances, difficulty expressing oneself. That's those people that will be talking around in circles and you can't figure out where they're going. They're tangential. And you have to help them refocus when you need to communicate with somebody that's had a behavioral reaction to trauma. Some people become very argumentative. You'll see an increased use of alcohol or drugs, but you also may see somebody that withdraws and has apathy. There's just a lack of interest or concern. And all of these are normal. There's no right or wrong reaction. These are normal. And some people will avoid any reaction, any behavioral reaction. They dip out, they check out, they dip out. So delayed behavioral actions, you might see reactions to trauma. Avoidance of event reminders. If someone has lost a significant other to a trauma, they may not want to celebrate that death anniversary. They might not want to go to an event that reminds them of the trauma. The concerts where they have those shootings, people probably aren't going back to that concert if they experienced trauma. Social relationship disturbances, you might still stay in a relationship with somebody, but if somebody's endured trauma, the relationship's going to be strained. Decreased activity level is another thing, because someone becomes apathetic, they become withdrawn, they become avoidant, and they stop engaging in activities that they used to do, which is detrimental to our mental health, increases our risk for substance use as well. Engagement in high-risk behaviors. You can see people in substance use treatment. They fall in love with somebody in 2 weeks in treatment, they dip out, and they're engaging back not only in substance use, but high-risk sexual behaviors with somebody that they don't know. We had a male and a female leave our program, I want to say last August, and she ended up coming back into treatment. But she had been raped repeatedly by this man and beaten severely because she didn't know him. She didn't know his history. Right? She found him attractive, and away they went. And now she's trying to deal with that trauma sober in relation to the trauma that she endured with someone here in treatment. And actually, she's transferring to a women's program that we have up in Saginaw, because because we have men in this program, it's too much trauma for her. It's just men walk by her and she has this physiological reaction to being near men. So that's another nice fit for her. There's an increased use of alcohol, drugs, and tobacco, withdrawal. We don't talk about this one very often. So there's immediate existential reactions and delayed existential reactions to trauma. You will see some cultures use intense use of prayer. Some immediate existential reactions are restoration of faith in the goodness of others. So when trauma has happened, say the tornadoes come or there's been flooding, and you see the community rise up and help people clean up their homes and try to rebuild their community. That existential relationship can be really gratifying for people to say, all right, this is a tragedy, but look at the love and support that the community has. Self-efficacy is something in substance use and with trauma that is lost when people walk through our doors. They lose the sense that they are capable of. And so someone's been drinking for 44 years. The self-efficacy to say, I am capable of sustaining this recovery process, when in fact their history has said everything contrary to that, is something that we work really hard to build. Their self-efficacy, that they are capable of being whoever they want to redefine themselves. Just because you endured a traumatic reaction or you came from an abusive relationship doesn't mean that you are worth nothing. It means that we need to talk about, what does a healthy relationship look like for you? How do you make those changes and build your self-efficacy that you are capable and worthy of being in a safe, kind, loving relationship with somebody? There's a lot of despair about humanity, particularly if the event was intentional. A loss of purpose. What are we going to do now? What am I going to do now? I think we see that a lot in relation to trauma, but also in substance use. What is my purpose? I've just been drinking I've been shooting heroin for the last 10 years. I don't know who I am anymore, and I don't know who I want to be. I don't know what I'm good at. I don't have a purpose other than being an addict. And we have to really work on that. People that have prostituted themselves, that was their purpose, but it was also trauma related. So how do we help support them in making slow and gradual changes on all sorts of different levels? And it's not easy, because we're oftentimes dealing with medical issues, mental health issues, there's substance use issues, and the recovery living environment, being homeless, unemployed, perhaps needing SSI or SSD. They don't have a GED or a high school. And how do we help them rebuild, not just address the trauma or not just address substance use, but how do we help rebuild all of the parts of their lives that have been broken, including the children? So it's very interesting in our residential program to watch families trying to re-heal, and parents that try to start parenting sober, and watching children's reactions like, you're not going to tell me what to do. You haven't been telling me what to do for 9 months or 9 years because you've been drunk or high, and now you think you're going to parent me? So the parents have to reestablish their purpose And children have to redefine their trust in their parent to say that, yes, I trust that you're going to sustain your sobriety, but that's only through you showing me every single day that you're going to sustain your sobriety. Kids are resilient, but they're also very wary. Like, you've promised me before. How do I know this time's the real deal? So delayed existential reactions to trauma. Why me? Why did this happen to me? I was a good person. Why would someone harm me? Increased cynicism that the world's not a safe place. It's not a good place. That all I am is this. This trauma defines me. But then you also get people that can have an increase in their self-confidence. If I survive that, I can survive anything. And we're going to talk about resilience at the end of this training. Some people have renewed faith, but other people feel hopeless. Some folks reestablish priorities. Okay, well, I went to hell and back, like the younger female that I told you about that left treatment with the man. She's reestablishing our priorities. I'm going to go to an all-female substance use program. I'm going to address my trauma with an EMDR therapist. And I am going, she wants to get her GED so that she can possibly go back go into college or cosmetology. She's undecided at that point. Some people will redefine meaning and the importance of life, and some people will rework life's assumptions to accommodate the trauma. Like, so if someone has been beaten, they might take a self-defense class to reestablish their sense of trauma, but they don't have to be traumatized anymore. All right, I want you to think about this. And when people come in treatment, they say, I've got PTSD, and then the litany of all the other diagnoses that people provide with the bipolar disorders and the ADHDs and the borderline personality disorders or antisocial personality disorders. But common experiences of trauma, most survivors exhibit immediate reactions which typically resolve without long-term consequences because most trauma survivors are highly resilient. And they develop appropriate coping strategies, including the use of social supports to deal with the aftermath and effects of trauma. And I think we harbor in too much on those that we say they have PTSD. Maybe they don't. Maybe they just have endured trauma. And with time, in healing, and social supports, and appropriate people to deal with the aftermath and the effects of their trauma, they don't have PTSD. They've endured it. They got through it because they're resilient. And I also want to speak to people with substance abuse. I think that every person that comes through our treatment programs, like, you're a resilient human being because you went through trauma and substance use and loss. And here you are. You walk through the doors and you're willing to give it another shot, even if people have relapsed and they come back through our doors. I really just applaud them because they're resilient. They're not quitting. And I think that has to be commended, and because they don't feel that. And it has to be pointed out to them. They're resilient human beings. Common experience of trauma. Most people recover with time. They show minimal long-term distress and function effectively across major life areas and developmental stages. Little kids do too. I think of parents that are coming into treatment with their children who have seen moms being beaten or dads being hit with frying pans or stabbed. Those little kids are resilient and they will recover over time. And as the parents heal, they are healing with their parents. So even so, those who show little impairment may have subclinical symptoms that don't fit acute stress disorder or PTSD. Subclinical means they have the symptoms, but they're going to pass quicker than they would if you have acute stress disorder or PTSD. Only a small percentage of people with a history of trauma show impairments that meet criteria for trauma-related stress disorders. How many of you, by a raise of hand, are familiar with acute stress disorder? Okay. It is one that we don't talk about. I think we often go right to PTSD, but have you heard of it, Christina? You're muted. Have you heard of acute stress disorder? Are you familiar with that? You're muted.
I'm on mute. Can you guys hear me now? I'm kind of new to this. I'm sorry. I was talking. I apologize.
So are you familiar with acute stress disorder? Because we don't talk about it often. We often go to post-traumatic stress disorder from trauma without even considering subclinical levels of trauma in symptoms, and then acute stress disorder.
You know, I'm really not that all familiar with that. I think I may be. This is just a big word. I've dealt with a lot of like addiction in my life and things, so I probably am aware of it. I just don't know the clinical term of it.
Okay. Well, we will go through it briefly. We know people. We'll go through it. How about you, Nancy? Are you familiar with it? Okay. All right. So let's take a look. We'll go into that in a little bit. So people that have experienced trauma, they have emotional dysregulation, meaning their emotional set isn't consistent to healthy functioning. They're all over the place. They can be crying at one moment, laughing at another, still disassociating, withdrawn, isolated, and then want to engage in playing chess with somebody at a table. So it's peculiar to watch that dysregulation, and our focus using DBT mindfulness skills is to get them to regulate their emotions consistently and appropriately. If they're functioning well prior to trauma, this emotional dysregulation might be short-lived and include anger, anxiety, sadness, and shame. I will disclose I lost my mother in 2017 in a tragic, unexpected car accident, and she was killed instantly. And that unanticipated loss for me elicited those feelings, and I was very emotionally dysregulated for about 3 days. I did not know what to do. I found myself literally spinning in my house, not sure where I should go, what I should do. I couldn't regulate me because I couldn't process what had happened. And it was very peculiar for me, because usually when I have an emotional response, it comes out, I have physiological responses. I will be that person that will tremor and shake, and but I cognitively and emotionally, I'm pretty solid. But if you look at me, I look like I'm a train wreck when I have endured trauma or loss. So it's just really important. That's a very subjective thing, but you can have all of those emotions all within a cycle where you look like you're manic. And I went through it. It was very, very uncomfortable. So when people are going through this state of emotional dysregulation, they often will self-medicate because substance use is often a common method used to gain emotional control. Ultimately, it results in further emotional dysregulation. People say, I just need a drink. Give me a drink. Or just give me a hit of that joint. I'll feel much better. Give me a cigarette. I just need a cigarette. And so there's a means to try to regulate themselves. But once you start going down that rabbit hole, that can just be even more risk to sustaining unaddressed trauma. People will engage in high-risk behaviors or even self-injurious behaviors, cutting and burning. They have to be aware of suicidal ideations, intents, plans, means. Compulsive behaviors, people might be overworking, they might be gambling. You can see people, they'll just start cleaning their house compulsively because they're in such emotional dysregulation. And there's a lot of repression or denial of emotions. Some people say, I'm fine. How many people who have just endured something where you say, holy moly, how are you? I'm fine. But they're blunted. They're not fine, but they don't have an emotion that they can state to you that makes sense for them. And then you get some people that have a commitment to exercise or creating a network of support for people based on whatever trauma they've endured. All right, emotional responses. Feeling too much is when people become overwhelmed. And when people feel too little, they will feel numb. They feel nothing. Numbing is a biological process whereby emotions are detached from your thoughts, behaviors, or memories. Initially, numbing might be a protective factor, but long-term, it can be pretty severe and maladaptive because emotional numbing stops the relationship between prior trauma and the later psychological distress, meaning they're prone to PTSD. Because if they're numb, we're not picking up that they're numb because they seem like they're coping okay when they feel nothing. But if you don't address them, they are much more likely to have PTSD because the symptoms hide what's going on inside of them emotionally. And it leaves others to assess their traumatic stress, and the impact of the stress is less severe than they actually are. So I think that that's tough clinically to pick apart because some people haven't, like we talked about, not all people respond as though this is trauma for me. It's not PTSD. And so how to make the differentiation between someone numbing their symptoms versus someone that's just coping and they're getting through it and they're having a trauma response, but it's not significant to the point where it's going to turn into PTSD. It's difficult to tease out. And if we don't know the people well, it's almost like it's a waiting game for me. Like how do you poke without causing undue traumatic stress to the person? I absolutely don't want to do further harm, but I am trying to assess, is this a numbness that's going to lead to PTSD, or is this an adaptive response for them? So the goal is to learn for folks to regulate emotions without the use of substances or other drugs. Okay, physical responses to trauma. That may be the first response to trauma. Primary care physicians are often the first person to identify that someone's endured trauma. They come in and they say, I'm not doing well, I'm not feeling well, I can't sleep, I'm all over the place, or I've got chronic bowel issues and I can't think right anymore, and my breathing's off, and I'm having panic attacks, or I've got rashes that I can't seem to control. Shingles is often brought on by stress or trauma for older folks, and substance use disorder. So sometimes primary care physicians are the first person of contact to identify that somebody's endured trauma. So they might have also somatic complaints where body symptoms are focused on to express their emotional distress. Our thought processes can be altered as a result of trauma because it can challenge the just world of what we live in. The world isn't just anymore. And it can challenge the life assumptions that help people navigate daily life. Unexpected trauma can challenge our belief systems. And our folks that walk through these doors, you know, we have people say, I never thought I'd be hit by somebody. I never thought that this would happen. I never thought I would be thrown out of a vehicle. We had a lady who was thrown out of a vehicle that was going over 100 miles an hour on I-75. She survived, and her best friend and her boyfriend died. And she just cannot believe that she's still alive. She has that survivor's guilt, but also that unexpected trauma challenges her belief system. She was charged as the driver, and she wasn't even driving the vehicle. So it changed her whole belief system. But we can look at another example of a car accident where you're hit from behind, and after the accident, for some time we become hypervigilant. We start checking our rear view mirror more often. We might be taking a different route home because you got hit really hard on a highway until our belief system is restored or we work through time and no more further trauma is endured. So will we engage in enough positive practice that we're sure, okay, well, that was a one-time deal, or it was a freak accident and I'm fine to drive on the highway again. But it takes a minute. We're hypervigilant at first. But there are some people that can't return to their previous belief systems and they can't rework them. leading them to believe that the world's an unsafe place. All right, there are cognitive patterns of trauma, and I think this is really an important slide, that many factors contribute to cognitive patterns prior to, during, and after trauma. And this triad model suggests that trauma can alter three main cognitive patterns. It can alter our view about the world. We now think that the world is a dangerous place, that people can't be trusted, that life's unpredictable. And I would say that 95% of the people walking through the doors of Odyssey House will have that view about the world. Views about their self: I'm incompetent, I should have reacted differently, I feel damaged, it's too much for me to handle, I shouldn't have put myself in that situation, I couldn't get out of that situation, I didn't know what to do. And views about their future. Things are never going to be the same because of the trauma that they endured. Or what's the point of getting sober? Because I'm never going to get over this trauma. It's not going to go away. I feel hopeless about my future. Who am I? I'm damaged goods. Who's going to love me? I don't love me. So how's my life going to work out for me? So you get a lot of different patterns in the way people think about their trauma. They also, people that have endured trauma have cognitive errors. They misinterpret situations as dangerous because it resembles even remotely a previous trauma. Here's an example, and this is similar to my daughter's significant other who endured trauma. It'd be like someone overreacting to an overturned canoe in shallow water as if he or she would drown due to a previous experience of nearly drowning in a rip current 5 years prior. In my daughter's case, she's seeing a fella there at Grand Valley in college. And before his first year of college, he was on vacation down, I want to say like Brazil or Cancun. And he and his girlfriend at the time were out in the water and they got caught in a riptide, and she drowned and he didn't. And he will not go in water, period. Take a shower, but he will not get in any public lake or water as a result of that. It's a cognitive error for him, because we know our general inland lakes don't have riptides, but he won't get in the water. Excessive or inappropriate guilt. Attempting to make sense cognitively and gain control over a traumatic experience by assuming responsibility or possessing survivor's guilt because others who experienced the same trauma did not survive. Would have, should have, could have. It should have been me. The female that I just spoke to you about who flew through the windshield on I-75, she has a lot of survivor's guilt. And she was charged, like I said, with the being the driver of the vehicle and spent time in prison. But she claimed she was in the back seat and there was no way that she could have gone out the window the way she did if she was the driver. So she has a lot of excessive and inappropriate guilt. Okay, idealization are inaccurate rationalizations, idealizations, or justifications of a perpetrator's behavior, particularly if the perpetrator is a caregiver. We have had a female in our program who endured traumatic stress by her father, who had her engage in oral sex with him when she was 9 years old, and her mother watched. And her response, even to this day, is, I don't think he was trying to harm me. She said, but I think that was his way of exposing me to what sex is. Like, she normalizes it and she idealizes. She said, I'm sure it was wrong, but it didn't feel like it was wrong because my mom was there and I didn't feel I was in any danger. And it's interesting to hear that and be careful and respectful of how you respond to that person's view of what happened to her. And it's sensitive because she knows that society says it was traumatic, but for her, it was confusing, but not necessarily traumatic. And we can also have people that have trauma-induced hallucinations or delusions, and they might not be a biological in origin. They are cognitions that are congruent with the traumatic content. This is where we have to be culturally sensitive and conscious as well, that people that have endured trauma may have cultural responses that are different from our own, and to query about what those mean for that person, rather than stereotyping that they might be mentally ill. Here was an example of a woman who was African American. She believed that a person stepping into the bus was her father, who had sexually abused her repeatedly as a child. And because this man wore shoes similar to those her father once wore, she thought that that was her father on the bus. So there's a lot of intrusive thoughts and memories. I see this a lot in our building. They experience them without warning. They don't desire them. The thoughts and memories that are associated with the trauma, these intrusive thoughts, trigger strong emotional and behavioral reactions as if the trauma was recurring in the present. They come rapidly and they're referred to as flooding. You get a flooding of this trauma, and they're very disruptive. We see that when things are very noisy here. We will have, I see more often men than women, they will go outside. The noise and the triggering will elicit this recurrent intrusive memory of their trauma. And I will also say in our program, it's not exactly 50-50, but I would say there is an extensive amount of sexual and physical trauma in the men that are coming into treatment here at Odyssey House. And for them to disclose that in a safe, protected way can be very, very difficult, because societally men are supposed to be big and strong and to fight off any sort of sexual perpetrators. So here's something to think about as counselors and professionals in working with children and adults who may have trauma and substance use disorders. Individuals who are inadvertently re-traumatized due to a program or clinical practices may have a surge of intrusive thoughts of past trauma and can't discern past from present. When counseling focuses on trauma, most individuals will experience some intrusive thoughts or memories. Teaching coping skills are very important before, as much as possible, doing trauma-informed treatment. So you do the coping before you do trauma treatment. I think it's important to say to anybody that walks through our door, we have to assume they've endured some sort of trauma. And if you treat all people like that, whether they've endured trauma or not, you're doing something that I believe is best practice, because you're protecting that person without knowing their past. Because not all people are going to disclose their trauma or all of it to you until they feel safe, and if they want to. Okay, here we go. Here's your acute stress disorder that I was speaking to you guys about. Acute stress disorder is stress that somebody experiences based on trauma, and it resolves 2 days to 4 weeks after an event, and then it passes. It's a normal response to stress or trauma or loss. Appears overwhelmed by the traumatic experience, and generally it's related only to one traumatic incident rather than complex long-term traumas. Complex trauma usually is long history, and so acute stress disorder generally applies to one event. Some people have the need to continually talk about their experience, describe in repetitive detail what's happened, or be obsessed with trying to understand what happened in order to make sense of the experience. It can get annoying to people if they don't understand what the person's going through. Did that really happen? Tell me what were all the things that were going on? I couldn't understand what was happening. Will you tell me again exactly what happened? Individuals can be hypervigilant and avoid circumstances that are reminders of the trauma. Partial amnesia for the trauma often accompanies acute stress disorder, and the individual may repeatedly ask questions to fill in that detail. They often require assurance from others that the event happened in the way that they remembered it, and that they're not losing it, and that they could have not prevented the event. We know people that have violent traumas or have been a part of a violent event. Anywhere from 20 to 50% of people will have an acute stress disorder. If people, for example, have experienced like burns, which is a traumatic event, if they've been burned in a fire, about 10% of people will have acute stress disorders. So it really is varied on the degree of the level and intensity and complexity of the trauma. Okay, here we go in substance use and PTSD, important treatment facts. Post-traumatic stress disorder is one of the most common co-occurring mental disorders found in substance use treatment. PTSD abuse, they abuse a wide range of substances. I think we often have this stereotype that people with PTSD just drink alcohol, but that's not true. There is no one drug of choice for people that have experienced PTSD. People in treatment for PTSD and SUD have a more severe clinical profile than those with just one of these disorders. So if you have PTSD that stands alone and not substance use disorder, your clinical profile is less severe. If you have substance use disorder without trauma, then you have a less severe clinical profile. But those two combined is more difficult to treat. They have a higher risk for suicidality. Oops, sorry. And it's something that we just have to be mindful of. I think if you think about I'm trying to think about which war it was in the 60s. Help me, somebody. We thought about the veterans who were using heroin all the time. And that was their DOC because they were veterans of, I can't believe I can't think of it, Vietnam War. So just be thoughtful of that. The PTSD with or without major depression in and of itself significantly increases the risk for suicide. Gender difference in post-traumatic stress disorder and substance use. There are gender differences. The rates of trauma related to disorders are high in men and women in substance use treatment, but they are higher in women than men. Women with post-traumatic stress disorder most frequently experience rape or witness a killing or an injury. About 8% of women experience post-traumatic stress disorder. Men with both the substance use disorder and PTSD typically witness a killing or an injury, or they were a victim of a sudden injury or accident. And about 4% of men report having symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. If we look at the cycle of violence when we combine substance use and post-traumatic stress disorder, it is cyclical and it's bidirectional. When we're under the influence of substances, a person's more vulnerable to traumatic events, automobile crashes, assaults, accidents, physical and sexual assaults. And it's, when I say it's bidirectional and cyclical, substance use increases trauma risk, and exposure to trauma escalates substance use. And they use that to manage the trauma and the related symptoms. So think about that. When people leave treatment and they're using substances, they're increasing their risk to all sorts of potentially dangerous or risky behaviors, including trauma. And then if you've been exposed to that trauma, it escalates substance use disorders. So we had a young man come into our detox program. He couldn't have been 23 or 4. And he left treatment with a guy. They decided they didn't want a complete detox. They wanted to get high. And about 6 days later, this young gentleman came back into detox. And he was very disassociative. He had a hard time articulating what was going on with him. He was only able to state, I need to get these sweatpants off. And so they called me upstairs and were like, Dr. Dunn, there's something really different about him from 6 days ago. And I asked him, what's the matter with your sweatpants? And he said to me, he said, the balls, so like the pilling of the sweatpants, he said, they're bothering me. I can't wear these. I said, well, we'll get you some new pants. Later on, he disclosed that the man that he had left treatment with had repeatedly raped him over those 5 days, kept him high, and he was able to get away, but those were the same clothing. He was wearing the same clothing that he had been raped for 5 days with. So that's why he wanted to get out of those clothes. So I think where you look at that bidirectionality and the cyclical nature of it, it's pretty damaging. Perpetrators of violent assault also are under the influence of substances, or they test positive for substances at the time that they're arrested. So perpetrators become higher risk when they're under the influence of substance use. Okay, important treatment facts. It's important to recognize and help clients understand that becoming abstinent from substance use does not resolve PTSD. And in fact, and I think this is an interesting fact, sometimes PTSD symptoms become worse with abstinence for some people. So both disorders must be addressed in treatment. Why do we think some PTSD symptoms become worse with abstinence?
You don't get to numb the feelings anymore.
That's right. So what would be, Ken, a solution to that when they're coming into treatment?
Besides all the meds, really just, I think, patience, and then really kind of talking through the experience and those feelings. What does that feel like? Helping them kind of some of those DBT skills. This is what it feels like. This is that feeling, helping name it, and then some mindfulness kind of techniques to push them away.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think medications can help. I know a lot of folks, sleep is petrifying for them because they have such terrible night terrors and nightmares. And our prescribers here will often give prazosin, which helps for some people, but not all people. And it seems to get worse when people are experiencing pause, post-acute withdrawal symptoms. So for those of you that don't know, it often happens at 90 days. It's like a 90-day marker that seems to go on, and people's trauma seems to also be revisited at those periods of times. Treatment outcomes for clients with PTSD and substance use are worse than clients for other co-occurring disorders or who only abuse substances. So we need to be mindful that they both need to be treated while they're in treatment. Okay, triggers and flashbacks. A trigger is a stimulus that sets off a memory of a trauma or a part of it. I can tell you we had a man in treatment and I learned my lesson. I will pat people. I'm a patter. And I was walking behind him and I patted him and I said, "Excuse me, I need to get around you." And I set that poor man off. He had such a response of a trauma because I touched him on his shoulder from behind. And it was awful. He re-experienced a previous traumatic event that I elicited as though it was happening for him in that moment. And I had to process with him and debrief, well, what the dickens just happened? And I had worked with him a previous treatment session, but I wasn't aware of the new trauma that he endured between his gaps in treatment episodes. So even though flashbacks can last a matter of seconds, to the person that's experiencing them, it feels much longer than that. And then after the flashback stops, the emotional after effects linger for hours or longer. And so it's got to be very difficult to be sitting in groups trying to learn about relapse prevention when you're having an emotional after effect. You know how, like, you have aftershocks from earthquakes? That's what I think these must feel like for these folks. And to sit in there and have those experiences when you're trying to learn about relapse prevention and you've just relived a trauma, it's got to be brutal for them. And a lot of people won't tell what they're going through. So they just disassociate or they endure that quietly for 2 hours while they're in group. But generally flashbacks are initiated by triggers, but not always. Sometimes they occur out of the blue, and those are more frightening for people because they don't know why they came. They can't figure out how to prevent it if they don't know why. They can't identify what the trigger was that elicited them. So some people describe it as feeling like a brief movie scene, not a movie scene that intrudes upon them. And after it happens, there's fatigue, high levels of stress, or other physical states that can induce additional flashbacks as well. So we need to be mindful when somebody's endured one of those to give them some quiet time. How can we get them to decompress so that they're not in a state of hyper arousal? And I'm also always looking for suicidal ideations.
Kristine, we have an individual with their hand raised.
Oh, hi.
Hi, I'm Stacy. I work at the Harbor. I just wanted to add to that. So I have a lot of experience working with people who have PTSD, either symptoms or actual diagnosis. And I've been told it's like the equivalent of someone jumping out behind the door to scare you. So you recognize that the threat is not real, but you're still going through the emotional part of being scared.
Yeah, and I think that's coupled with, we're looking at, we broke it down into the behavioral, the emotional, the physiological responses that we have. But if you're experiencing all of those at one time, think of how re-traumatizing that must feel to somebody.
All right, so just because you recognize that the threat isn't there doesn't mean that all the other stuff just goes away too.
I absolutely agree. That's a great point. Thank you. Okay, re-experiencing trauma. So we talked about flashbacks, we talked about nightmares, talked about intrusive thoughts. And I think as professionals, we have to be mindful of examples that we give when we're running groups, or not eliciting those intrusive thoughts. When we talk about grief and loss, people will have their own thoughts with the people that they've lost in their lives, but we have to be healing in the process rather than causing those thoughts to be left to their own devices. I think it's really important that we always have that processing piece, whether you're doing that in a therapy session or if you're running groups, to really walk through those things. You just have to be very sensitive. Trauma-informed care is a real thing, and it's a very important thing that I think all organizations, whether you're working with the public or not, because as employees, as human beings, people that we're working with, my peers, my colleagues, I don't know what all their trauma is. So when I'm cracking funnies or having conversations, I have to be mindful of who's my audience, and am I being appropriate with using trauma-informed care. So how do we help manage flashbacks and triggers? If someone becomes triggered, we have to help the individual focus on what is happening in the here and now using grounding techniques such as the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Is everybody familiar with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? Is anybody not familiar with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? Okay, so it's pretty simple and it's great, and it's been incredibly effective for people that have had panic attacks. And so what you do is you have, wherever they are, you get them to refocus on things in their environment. So you ask them to, it's a grounding technique. So you ask them to identify 5 things that they can see. Then they have to focus on 4 things that they can touch. Then they have to focus on 3 things that they can hear. Then they have to focus on 2 things that they can smell. And sometimes that's hard, depending on where their environment is. And then focus on 2 things, or 1 thing that you can taste. If you're doing these practice sessions of grounding techniques in your office, it's pretty easy to do. You can have, you might have like water with some mint in it, or, where they have flavored water now. So that would be something that they could taste. 2 things that they can smell. You might have oils in your office for people to smell. So it gets them grounded and calm. And it's not, I think it's a good way to end a session when you've done trauma, when you've been working on someone's trauma. Let's close up with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Is there anything that anybody else uses that's been effective when you've just had a session dealing with trauma? Okay. Well, we want to distinguish what's happening now versus what's happened in the past. Education about the experiences of triggers and flashbacks. And it's really important to normalize these. If people feel like they're going crazy and they have no control over these, it's unsteady feeling or place to be in somebody's head. So we need to normalize that these are common stress reactions to trauma, and support them through that process. And that with time and with grounding and DBT techniques, that these will decrease with time. Some people need to discuss their experience and understand why the flashback or trigger occurred. And it helps people draw a connection between a trigger and a traumatic event as a prevention strategy to anticipate a situation that might place them at higher risk for re-traumatization and requires use of coping strategies. So some people come into treatment and on day one, they want to tell you all their trauma and everything that happened to them in the last 12 years related to trauma. And I really try to slow that down. And I say, we'll get to that, but let's get you stable and get you into a routine. Let's start on, let's understand your substance use history, maybe your unidentified core issues that have sustained your life. Tell me about, significant events in your life, but trauma we'll get to. And because, when they vomit all of that, that's a bad word, but when they want to disclose the whole bag at once, it's too much for us to break down. And it leaves somebody that we haven't built a strong relationship with to do nothing with. What do we do with all of that? Because we don't know what their coping skills are. It's just not a good way to begin. Any other thoughts from other people on that? So I try to slow that trauma train down and have them it's like, to me, when you're fishing, you let out the line a little bit at a time so that I can process and understand what that experience is like for them. And then how do I help them? How we close up the session, and what skills do they need to work on? What journaling do they need to do? What homework do they need to complete to reflect on what they talked about in session?
And I see that, like you said, it's common. Sometimes they're so desperate to get into that first appointment that, and it's often that person is very ready for treatment, but their intake is like they've been waiting months to just let all of it out at once. And it's like, it's frustrating in a clinical sense. Like, sorry, I have a series of questions that the state tells me I have to ask first before I can provide you any actual treatment. So, so it's sometimes pausing that or helping them at least dump it and then say, but we will get to that later, so they don't feel stuck either.
Yes. Something else I think can be a good exercise when someone does that. Ken, I agree with you. I will give them a trauma screen to complete on their own quietly so that they can really think about their trauma, and then I can read it and I can process it. And if I have questions, then I can start tapping into that. But that way is another means, I think, of they're heard. They're just heard in a different way, and that they can reflect on their trauma and really try to explain it on paper.
We have our kids do journaling here.
Oh, good. How receptive are kids to that?
Very, if we respect their privacy.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
Not reading their journal without their permission.
Okay. Do you find that kids will want to show you, or is it just?
Yes, absolutely. If you let them do it on their own terms and not be nosy.
That's great.
Mutual respect. We don't want them reading our stuff either. So.
Okay. I think that's terrific. I wouldn't, depending on the kid, I wouldn't have thought that most kids would love that, but I think that's great.
Yeah, it's better than them telling war stories to each other, because that's what it turns into.
Yeah, good point. All right, what is disassociation? It's a word we throw around a lot. I tell you, I just did a psychological evaluation on a fella that I was astounded at how many times the man disassociated during IQ testing. I'm like, well, the results are invalid. It's fascinating to watch him, but on time tests, he's disassociating and he's stopping, and his eyes would go to the right, and he starts mumbling and he starts laughing, and he was responding to internal stimuli as well. But it is a mental association that severs connections among a person's thoughts, memories, feelings, actions, and a sense of identity. It happens because a person is engaged in an automatic activity and is not paying attention to the immediate environment. The man that I was working with, he's 26. His first interaction with me, he says to me, I was tortured. And I'm like, whoa, because he quit college. And I said, and I'm thinking he was physically tortured. Maybe he was at a hazing party at a, fraternity, and he was tortured. And it eventually got to the fact that he's tortured in his mind. But I think he has some undisclosed trauma, because he also said to me that he wanted to engage in mass harm to the kids in his high school that harmed him. And he went to an all-boys school. His mother wonders if he was raped, either at college or at his high school. And because he had access to guns, this was just recently, I had to, so this was a private practice guy I was seeing. So I had to call the parents and say, you need the guns locked up and you need to take him to the hospital, because I don't know that he won't engage in mass harm. When he said, he identified who the people were. If he has undisclosed trauma, sexual trauma from these people, from kids, in today's world, I just wasn't playing with that one. It gave me goosebumps. Like, what do we do here? He may have notable trauma. He's identified. Then he said his high school kids. So he identified a location, which was De La Salle High School. And I'm like, uh-oh. So the parents were able to get him into a psychiatric unit, and he was getting the help that he needed. But his disassociation was so, on a clinical level, fascinating to watch, but very concerning as well. Especially when he wanted the IQ test, because he was very curious about how smart he was. Okay, disassociation can occur during severe stress or trauma, and it can be protective. When people click off, sometimes the world in front of them is too much for them to process. And so it serves as a protective factor. I don't need to pay attention to all of these details in my life right now, because I might feel like I'm going to implode. But when people dissociate, they lose time. They sometimes lose track of where they are in their space, their locations. Distortion of identity. Who am I and where have I been? And it's a very common symptom in traumatic stress reactions. And be mindful of that. Just because they click off doesn't mean that they're under undue distress. It's just protecting them for what they're able to take in. It helps to distance the experience from the individual. Those that have to experience severe or trauma may have learned to separate themselves from distress to survive. I think of people that are human trafficked for sex. I do think that they click off. And I use that, I think they disassociate because the trauma that they're enduring is too much for them to take in. And so I think it's a protective factor for them to be able to survive. And that's where that resilience comes in, that we talk about how people endure that and are still willing to come in and get treatment and help is just an incredible journey of strength that it must take for them to be able to say, I need the help. So sometimes this association can be pervasive and symptomatic of a mental disorder called dissociative identity disorder, which used to be our old multiple personality disorder. So that's also fascinating to watch. We've had 3, maybe 4 in the 6.5 years I've worked at Odyssey House where I've watched that, and it's fascinating. Okay. Disassociation also includes depersonalization and derealization. These are facets of disassociation. So when you depersonalize, you're leaving one's body as if watching yourself from a distance as an observer. That was the lady that I told you that would be in a group, and she would depersonalize and feel like she was floating over top of the group and she wasn't in her own body. And derealization is leading to a sense that what's taking place is unfamiliar and not real. Often individuals believe are going crazy because they are not in touch with their reactions. Can anybody give me an example of what that would look like? Or you've had that experience with somebody that you work with? We had a staff here that found one of our residents who was a frequent flyer. This man, he used heroin and fentanyl for, I bet you he was in our treatment program 17 times in 6 years. And he overdosed at the church across from where our building was, and the staff went over because he could hear someone saying, help, help, help. And when we went over, that's how he described his experience, was derealization. It was like he couldn't even, he had just said goodbye to the man, and the man said on the day he left treatment, he goes, I'm going to be good. I just found out I have a 9-year-old daughter, and she's going to meet me, and I'm going to be a sober dad. And then he's deceased within 24 hours. And he just felt like, this can't be real. I just wished him well yesterday. And he really, I think he really went through this derealization with the trauma that he endured by finding this man deceased. Okay, go ahead, Christina. No?
I was going to say, Dr. Dunn, we are coming up at that 90-minute mark. I do know you have a large number of slides, and I don't know if some people do have to step out. They're able to. If you're able to continue, and others can stay on, we can keep the presentation going.
Well, because I'm going to share the PowerPoint, I won't. I'll get to the parts that I think are really important to the conclusion of our trauma.
Okay. And then I just want to share, if someone does have to run off at that 1:30 mark, there is a link in the chat for the survey to get your certificate of attendance. So you would just click on that and complete it. So I just wanted to point that out, and I'll let you carry on. Okay,
I probably will take 5 more minutes and I'll wrap up. I think these are the pieces as professionals is really important to know. Be aware of your personal distance when you're working with somebody with trauma. Give them more space than less. Try to get them to a less stimulating environment. Speak slowly and calmly. Make eye contact. Reassure them that they're safe. Listen rather than respond. That's very difficult for us to do. Ask open-ended questions like, what's happened? What did that feel like for you? What do you need? What do you need from me right now? And also, sometimes people don't know that answer. So go in the back door and say, what don't you need from me right now? Use minimal self-disclosure about your own trauma history, because it doesn't matter to them in that point. Empathy is more effective than sympathy. Understand trauma, especially early in recovery, should begin with educating the individual about normalizing trauma-related symptoms. Create a sense of safety within the treatment environment. And address how trauma symptoms may interfere with their life currently, because really that's what we're starting to work with. Can't really fix their past. We can understand their past to help them with their current situation, but if you stay in the here and now, it is a starting point for hope. Don't force someone to speak in group. They don't need to disclose their trauma if they don't want to. Identify and explore strengths in their history to help them apply those strengths to their ability to function in the present. Anticipate and be sensitive to the needs of the individuals that have experienced that trauma. This you can figure out. Trauma-informed care is care and compassion. Not what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you. The 4 R's are part of just trauma-informed care that you guys can read through. It's a really important thing to understand. Building safety. If you don't have it, it looks like people mistrust you. It's a common problem for trauma survivors. Trauma impacts the entire person. We've kind of talked about this. Here's the adverse childhood experiences. Really, really great stuff. I don't discourage counselors to do adverse childhood experience screens with their residents, because I think you get a lot of good family background by them just filling out that screen. Here's resilience. That's really how I want to end. Resilience is a process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, and tragedy. It means bouncing back from difficult experiences. It's not a trait that people either have or don't have. It involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. People experiencing substance use disorders who seek treatment are resilient, and those that have endured trauma and lived through it are also resilient. And we need to share that with the people that we serve. I can't stress that enough. Other factors that involve resilience, the capacity to make realistic plans and take steps to carry them out, developing a positive view of yourself and confidence in your strengths and abilities, building skills in communication and problem solving, and the capacity to manage strong feelings and impulses. And these are things that people can develop. It's a personal journey. Not all people react to the same traumatic experiences and stressful life events. And what works well for building resilience in one person may not work for another. So use a variety of strategies. All right, that's it. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your input and your patience, and you can have a copy of this PowerPoint if you would like that. Just let Alesha know, or Ken.
Thank you, guys.
All right, guys, we're gonna wrap up really quick. If you guys do want a copy of the PowerPoint, if you don't mind throwing your email address in the chat so I can just make sure that you get that. And then I'll make sure, like I said, that I get that out to you guys. We want to thank all you guys and thank Dr. Dunn for the informative presentation, and all of you guys for joining us this afternoon. In the chat, I posted the link a little ahead of time. That's for the completion of the survey. You'll receive a prompt to download your certificate of attendance after that. If you guys have any issues with this or have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can email us at antistigma@odysseyvillage.com. Also, we want to invite you guys to join us Tuesday, July 18th for our next presentation in the Stigma Prevention Project series. Our next presenters will be a clinician and recovery coach manager, Nicole Straub. Nicole will be presenting multiple pathways, sustaining long-term lifestyle changes. Registration for that presentation will be open shortly after this one, and you can find the details on the Port Huron Odyssey House Facebook page, or as always, you can email us at the antistigma@odysseyvillage.com for the link, and we'll provide you with that as well. Just want to say again, thank you guys for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you guys at our upcoming presentations. Everybody have a good day, okay? And like I said, if you guys want the PowerPoint, just throw your email address in the chat, and I will take care of that and get that sent out to you guys. You guys have a good day. Thanks again.
Thank
See you
you.
later.
Okay, Alesha, so I will email you that. Didn't get through it all.
Oh, it was really, really good. I got one more person on screen still. Kristine, are you there? I'll call you.
Okay.
Okay. Have a good day.
So I don't see the leave button.
Bottom lower left, it should say end. Or leave. It's okay.
See you later.
Okay, bye.